Happy Sunday, July 24, 2022. I'm heading out to the observatory. It's about 8:40 this evening. Yeah. Got no sun on Canyon Mountain to the south and east. Sun's probably just recently set. It seems we're definitely on the incline now with sunsets. Earlier and earlier nights, I won't have to lose as much sleep during the astro going forward. Anyway, time to open up the observatory. Everything's got steps. One thing after the other. And sometimes you do them in the right order, sometimes you don't. We've got a little bit of wind out tonight, which means I have to be very particular about securing the roof tries. That's accomplishable by a series of bungee cords. Let's keep the door. There you go. You see the scope. It's in the park position, counterweight down. And as I would like to show you, the balance is very good. The new alignment all set up with right ascension and declination lining up pretty well. Take a bubble level. The one in the scope is pretty much centered up in terms of the deck. And then we can look at this one here, and that one's balanced out too. Got to always start the scope up in terms of the mount with it in the clockwise down position. Lights on, handset booting up. And we will initiate a warm restart, and then my only step after that will be to synchronize to Arcturus first, since I can catch it at this hour. It's right about up there, and then probably Vega or Altair after that. Made up a little list of about 10 NGCs for tonight. They're mostly going to be clusters, and that means I'm going to have to change the settings in terms of the imager, the CCD imager. That's done by pushing some buttons here, which are always awkward to get at because I'm not using a handset. Turning on this baby here to be able to get some signal. This is the only switch for turning it on and off. So plug the power into the handset, initializing the screen. We have communications. It was a little flaky last night. Gonna have to poke around a little bit and see if there's another termination for the cable. It's probably, they're both well made. I'm just gonna tweak on it a little bit. All right, scope's now aligned ideally. Okay, looked over the top of the scope. We would see Arcturus, and it isn't really visible right now unaided, but I can do it through the finder scope. Say we could get this image under here, you can see it. Arcturus is remarkably close. Probably within maybe 10 arc minutes, 5 to 10 arc minutes of the center of the finder scope. I know I can get an image here. It just takes a little bit of patience. This thing has to come to focus. You can see at least the crosshairs, and maybe when I look at it later on I'm going to be able to see Arcturus there. Okay, having synced Arcturus, I'm hoping that Spica will also be relatively close to the center of the finder scope. Let's put this baby up here, maybe we'll get a view of it. And you see the power lines there. Now I'll have an eyeball on it. Because I know that we're not perfectly looking at the North Pole of the celestial North Pole, when I go from Arcturus after syncing and then I go to Spica, I'll make the tiniest of adjustments in the azimuth and potentially in the declination in order to bring it a little bit closer to the center of the field of view of the finder scope. Then I'll go back to Arcturus, which hopefully will turn up here, somewhere in the center of the field. And then I'll make a final sinking movement. Now we're making an equatorial flip, and we're heading over to Vega. One thing I notice is I do have a lot of faux stars because I have high sensitivity set up on the imager, and I know they're faux stars because I got a lens cap on the scope. And we'll have another look through the finder scope. Vega is very close to the smallest little square in the middle. I might go ahead and make one tiny more mechanical adjustment and then sync. Well, let's have one more look. I did manage to get a little closer inside the box in the center of the crosshairs. I will do a center it with the handset using RA and DEC, and then I will synchronize it, and then we'll head for Antares. Now, it's more important that the scope actually be accurate to the east, because that's where all the studies I'll be imaging tonight are located, celestial east and south. And one last check, we're going to drop down on Antares, and although we won't be actually videoing any deep sky studies in Scorpio, it's a good check because it's deep south, as long as I don't have to look through the trees. Anyway, after this, we'll basically be focusing our alignment efforts on Nunki in Sagittarius and Altair in Aquila as the sky gets darker. And then as I go to each and every study, I'll try to center them up and then synchronize the scope again for the next, so it'll always fall in the field of view. I found this has worked quite well, actually, the last several nights. What I'm finding is that Antares always tends to be the most furthest off of all of the efforts to line the mount. And I anticipate that that is probably going to be a declination. You can see Antares there. It's off by probably at least a degree, which brings me to the point where we can do something very interesting. We can look at, when we go to align, come on baby, we can go to model parameters. And right now it's saying the horary angle, or right ascension essentially, is off by 2320 arc seconds, which amounts to about 3/4 of a degree. So that value is a little bit high. So I guess I ought to be adjusting the right ascension a little bit on that one. And then I'll do another syncing to Antares and save the model. Because the model parameters were so far off, in my estimation, I just went ahead and used a slight, more significant adjustment of the HA, or the azimuth, and a very slight adjustment of the DEC to actually center up Antares. So we're going to make one more test check, and that's going to be Altair. And here's that look at Altair, and you can see it's off a little ways too. Not bad though, not nearly as far off as Antares was. So I'm going to go ahead and just sync it up here and not make any mechanical adjustments. After making those adjustments, I went ahead and reset the model, and now Antares is quite a ways off. But now I'm going to begin over again, once again, and what we're going to do is, come on baby, center up on that. There we go. What we're going to do is do a 3-star alignment, and should improve with the basic fact that I've improved the mechanical alignment of the axis. Having centered Antares, you can see that Vega is quite a ways off. Now I didn't synchronize Antares because I blew out the model. So now I'm having to recreate another model, and that means using the align function rather than the synchronize function, so the data is stored semi-permanently in memory. Well, Altair ended up pretty much in the same position vis-a-vis the finder scope as Vega. So I'm probably going to have to repeat this a couple of times before I get them all to lie in. We're looking at now is Antares on the second pass. It's closer to the actual putting it in the box in the center of the finder scope. So we have made progress. It'll be interesting to look at the the parameters for alignment after this is done. Okay, here's that first look at Vega. Antares was pretty much in the box. I only made a very slight adjustment to do with the second alignment in Antares. It looks like Vega is as well, although I will adjust it. And here's that view, in this case, of Altair. Not seeing it on the screen. Maybe quite a ways off. I'm going to have to take a look eyeball-wise. Well, here's tonight's numbers. Before it was the right ascension, or the orrery hour index error was higher. Now the deck index error is higher. Polar axis azimuth is off and the elevation is off. So I'll continue to make slight mechanical adjustments every time I come out to the scope and just redo the model. But for the time being, the 3 stars are falling in pretty close. So as long as I synchronize every time I go to a deep sky study on that study, I should be able to center up the other one pretty well. And that's it for alignments for this evening. Full spectrum. Now it's on to settings for the imaging. And basically I'm going to go for stars. And so we're going to go for stars rather than nebulosity this evening. Shutter is down to 64 flood, and gain max is now at 30 as opposed to 128, and I think it was 42 for nebulosity. You can see all those little stars there. I'm going to have to look into that at some point. Those faux stars are going to populate the field every place we go, and it's going to basically mean these images are not very useful for any kind of astronomical follow-up, unless something turns up into unexpected. I noticed a bit of a glitch in the software. What you're seeing there is Altair centered on the screen using the star cluster and star parameters for imaging. The glitch in the software was once I stored the model, apparently it had to be reloaded. It didn't maintain it in active memory, so I had to reload it. Otherwise, when I went to synchronize the Altair, the scope just shot off in a crazy direction. So there are these little peculiarities that you will encounter with software like this. I'll have to keep an eye out for that in the future to see if it was just a glitch or whether or not the code was properly implemented. Once you store a model, it's assumed the model is already still actively available to you.